Hi everybody, bonjour à tous. My name is Maxime Cockrell. I'm the co-organizer of the Azure Quebec community meetup. And today we are very lucky because we have an amazing speaker from Toronto, Peter. Peter is a cybersecurity consultant with over 10 years of experience architecting and securing mission-critical IT infrastructure for various international organizations in public and private sector. And the specialty of Peter is Microsoft 365 security and Azure security solution, including Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. And if you have any question, please do not hesitate to use the chat box, and Peter will take the time to answer to all your questions. And thank you so much, Peter, to be here with us tonight. And I give you the floor.
Oh, great. Thank you, Maxine. All right. So as introduced, so my name is Peter, and I am here to walk you through the architecture for Defender for Endpoint. So before I start, I would just like to give a quick disclaimer. Anything that's presented within these slides or anything that I mention is really of my own personal view, and it's not related to my employer. And the last one is any material presented in this slide or in this talk. Hopefully you will do your own diligence in terms of the product and in terms of the features that are available in it. So before I start, I would like to thank the Microsoft Azure Quebec community for allowing me to present to all of you. Definitely appreciate the opportunity to do this. In terms of the objective for today's talk, I would like to talk to everyone about Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Servers, which is also part of Azure Defender for Cloud. And I would like to focus more on the architecture side, so I won't be talking too much about the features and all that. So hopefully that you have some idea in terms of the product features, and I can kind of walk you through, considering what you need to do for a new architecture deployment, or how to how to fix any issues that you have in your existing architecture. So it will be really architecture focused. And again, I'll be focusing more on Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Server. We'll talk a little bit about Unify Agent, and we'll talk about security management for the new security management for Defender for Endpoint. The agenda for today is I'll go over overview of the product, just so that everyone has an idea what Defender for Endpoint is. If you don't, I'll dive a little bit deeper about the endpoints that are supported. From there, we'll talk about the different type of architectures that you can have to protect your endpoints. And then we'll talk about unified solutions. And we'll talk about security management for Defender for Endpoint. And the last one is we will talk about Defender for Cloud and how that fits into the whole Defender for Endpoint. And the last two, we'll talk about integration, how Defender for Endpoint or Defender for Cloud can integrate with other Microsoft products, so you can see some of the additional features and benefits of everything working together. And lastly, I'll summarize everything within one slide. So hopefully I can put everything together for you and make everything make sense. Okay, so the overview. What is Defender for Cloud? So Defender for Cloud is an endpoint security protection. So it helps you to protect your endpoints. It prevents, detects, and helps you investigate any threats that may be on your endpoints. And these endpoints could be mobile, workstations, or servers. Additionally, it provides other protection capabilities such as attack surface reduction, next generation protection, and it provides EDR. Once integrated with other Microsoft products, it also provides that XDR function, which we'll also talk about later on. Now, in terms of kind of terminologies around Defender for Endpoint, a lot of people use the term Defender for Endpoint, but what I find in the field is they really mean a combination of different things. So, and I will just kind of like break it down for everyone. There is in my mind, there's three main components when I hear the word Defender for Endpoint. So there is Defender for Antivirus, which is the built-in antivirus to newer Windows operating system that works in conjunction with Defender for Endpoint. So Defender for Endpoint is a service that you purchase from Microsoft, or it comes with your Microsoft E5 subscription. And it provides really the EDR protection and the next generation protection on top of your Windows, your Microsoft Defender antivirus. And then the last component that I hear about is Defender for Servers. So Defender for Servers uses your existing Defender for Endpoint. You will get that license for Defender for Endpoint. On top of that, you will get additional features that comes with Defender for Cloud. I will talk more in depth about Defender for Cloud later on. So these are the kind of the three terminology and components that comes into play. And you hear these terminology repeated throughout the slides. Now, before I look at deploying Defender for Endpoint in any organization or any scenarios, I really like to understand the type of endpoints that are in scope to be protected, because there are many different endpoints that Defender for Endpoint can protect. So to give you an example, Defender for Endpoint can protect iOS, Android, macOS, Linux, and these are the different versions that Defender for Endpoint is able to protect. So it doesn't protect just Windows and Windows servers. It definitely protects wide range of different operating systems endpoint that are within your organization. And in terms of what it supports for Windows and Windows servers, these are the operating system that Defender for Endpoint supports for your Windows and Windows servers. And now that I have, understanding in terms of, what endpoints I'm looking to protect, what version of the endpoint that I'm looking to protect, then the next thing I kind of want to look at is Defender for Antivirus. Like I mentioned, Defender for Antivirus is a separate component that works in conjunction with Defender for Endpoint. However, the OS version that's supported for Defender Antivirus is different from the OS version that is supported for Defender for Endpoint. So as an example, Defender for Endpoint is supported for Windows 2012 R2, Windows 2008, Windows 7, and Windows 8. However, there is no antivirus solution for that. So you're missing that second set of protection. You're missing that AV side of protection. So what you have to do in that case is you have to incorporate another solution, either a third-party antivirus solution to help you complete that protection, that AV and EDR protection, or you can deploy Microsoft System Standard Endpoint Protection on these older versions of the OS to help you provide that same level of protection with the newer, compared to the newer OS version. So that is something to consider when you are looking at whether it's your existing deployment or a new deployment, that the operating system requirement for Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Antivirus are different. And kind of with that said, another aspect that you need to consider when we are talking about, on the same level as talking about operating system and operating system level for the different endpoints, is that the feature set is different between the different operating systems, obviously, but also between the different OS levels. So it is also something that you need to take into account and take into consideration when you are deploying the solution or when you are implementing any of these features for the solution. So some MVP from the internet has put together this chart, which is very helpful. There's a link on the presentation. So he has been very helpful in terms of putting together the different features that are available through Defender for Endpoint and what operating system you need to have and what the mode for your Defender antivirus needs to be. So I don't know if you could see my mouse, but your Defender antivirus has to be in specific mode for certain functions to work. So that is what you kind of need to consider when you're looking at deploying this product. First of all, is really looking at your endpoints and the operating system your endpoints is at. The next one is licensing, obviously. Like any Microsoft product, the licensing is super complicated. So for your actual workstations, mobile devices, what you would need to kind of consider is Defender for Endpoint, P1 or P2 license. If you are looking at servers, unfortunately, servers are not included in the Defender for Endpoint P1 or P2 license. You have to purchase Defender for Endpoint for Server license in order for you to deploy the product on your servers. Now, if you want to deploy your product on Defender for Cloud, or AKA Defender for Servers, you will need a different license, which is Defender for Servers P1 and P2. Now, additionally, Microsoft has recently released an add-on service that you can purchase on top of your existing Defender for Endpoint, which is the Defender Vulnerability Management Add-on. That will provide you some additional vulnerability management insights that will be available through your security.microsoft.com portal. Now, we've talked about and we've looked at the endpoints. We consider the endpoints. Now, I want to start looking at diving into the architecture of Defender for Endpoint. So when I look at the architecture for Defender for Endpoint, I look at it as the architecture is really defined by the endpoints that I am trying to protect. And then it is dependent on the management solution that I have to support these endpoints. I'll dive a little bit deeper and help to explain what that means. First of all, we need to kind of understand how the basics of how Defender for Endpoint works. So the basics of how Defender for Endpoint works is that there is a Defender agent that is either built in to new operating systems, or a log analytics agent has to be deployed to operating systems. For mobile device, you have to deploy agent as well. So there's always an agent that is involved. To manage that agent and to deploy that agent, it cannot be done through Defender for Endpoint itself. So it has to be done through an endpoint management solution. And that agent has to be deployed and it has to be onboarded onto Defender for Endpoint in order for that protection to work, in order for that endpoint to be able to send telemetry up to Defender for Cloud. So for that, obviously, the agent has to have connectivity outbound to the internet on port 443. And I provided a link there on the presentation of the different URLs that agent has to have access to. So if it's behind a firewall, you have to have that firewall open on port 443 to these specific endpoints in order for Defender for Endpoint to talk to Microsoft. So that's how it looks like in terms of on-premise representation and a representation of on the cloud. As I mentioned, agents must be deployed, and then also security features and configuration must be configured. Defender for Endpoint by itself cannot deploy the agents to these endpoints or any endpoints. And with asterisk, Defender for Endpoint has limited capability of configuring features, security features like attack surface reduction rules on the endpoint itself. So what is required is that you will have to have an existing endpoint management solution for you to deploy these agents and for you to do these configurations on the endpoints. And your management solution will be dependent on the endpoints that you are protecting, which is why my earlier slides were looking at what endpoints you're looking to protect within the scope of your project. Now we can look at what tools or solution that you can use to protect these endpoints. So as this table kind of illustrates, these are the supported tools by Microsoft to manage your endpoints. So as an example, for Windows, you can use group policy to deploy the agents and also to deploy the configurations to your Windows. You can also use Configuration Manager. For Workstation, you can use Intune or AKA Microsoft Endpoint Manager to deploy the settings to your workstations. For Mac, you can, Jamf is supported. Obviously, Microsoft's own Endpoint Manager is supported. Linux, you have 2 supported options, which being Puppet and Ansible. And for iOS and Android, the official supported solution is to have the agent and configuration pushed down through Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So to really kind of sum it up is when you are looking at your architecture for Defender for Endpoint, you're looking at the endpoint that you're protecting and then looking at the management solution that's able to manage the different OS, because it's going to be different. The management tool is going to be different for the OS that you're managing. Now, in terms of how that architecture looks like, Microsoft have put together some sample architectures. So these are your 4 sample architecture using only Microsoft technology. So, you're looking at using either these pictures using either Intune to manage your workstations and deploying policies, using Active Directory with group policies to push settings to your servers, or using SCCM to push the settings if you're in that co-managed state for your environment. Now, in terms of scenarios that I have encountered, it's a little bit more complicated than just using Microsoft technologies. And what I generally find is you will have a mix of different operating systems that you need to protect. Obviously, with the operating system that you need to protect, you have different management solutions. So just to kind of give you an illustration of something that I may come across is that you will have Linux servers that may be managed by Ansible. So you will deploy the agent and deploy the configuration through an Ansible playbook. And for your Windows workstation, your iOS mobile device, Android mobile device, and possibly Mac, those will be managed through Intune, and Intune will be pushing down the Defender agent once the endpoint is enrolled into Intune, and the configuration will then be pushed down as well. And then for Windows, we are still seeing, so I'm still seeing Windows being managed through Active Directory because Windows cannot be managed through Intune, and you're still seeing that the policies either being pushed down through either group policy or through SCCM, System Configuration Manager, for that configuration for that agent to be pushed down to Windows servers. Now, once the agent and configuration is pushed down, this is where you see that red arrow where it sends the telemetry and the EDR information back into Defender for Endpoint over port 443. So that is kind of the high-level architecture of Defender for Endpoint and the solution to manage the endpoints for the various operating systems. Next one I'm going to dive a little bit into is Unified Solution. Unified Solution is something that was a new feature, I would say, that was released within the last, I believe, 6 months or so. The use case around Unified Solution is, in the past, Windows Server 2012 R2 and Windows Server 2016 did not have feature parity with the newer Windows Server. So, for example, Windows Server 2019. They did not have feature parity. So there were missing features such as template protection or attack surface reduction rules, passive mode EDR block, and etc. Because there were, in my words, legacy operating systems. And additionally speaking, Windows Server 2012 R2 did not have built-in antivirus, Defender antivirus. So for you to deploy the solution with Defender for Endpoint on Windows Server 2012 R2, you had to either deploy a system standard endpoint protection or a third-party antivirus solution, which you have to pay again. So this, with the new unified solution, it comes with an antivirus for both Windows Server 2012 R2 and Windows Server 2016. So you don't have to worry about either installing SCEP or purchasing another third-party antivirus for you to get that full protection. Additionally speaking, with the antivirus, Microsoft have provide that feature parity or as close as possible to Windows Server 2019, or what you will see in Windows Server 2019. So you will see that temper protection, which is my next slide. So you do see that feature parity once you deploy unified solution for 2012 and 2016. So you will have that all your surface, I don't know if it's all your surface, but let's just say most of your attack surface reduction rules, and you will see that additional feature for EDR block mode and some of the other protection features that were missing when you deployed log analytics agent to Windows Server 2012 and 2016. To really kind of summarize this section is that right now, if you were to deploy agents, I think only the Unified Solutions agent is available for 2012 and 2016. However, if you have deployed Defender for Endpoint in the past, you will have most likely used the Log Analytics agent for 2012 and 2016. It will be beneficial for you to look into and testing the unified solution because it will definitely provide you a lot of additional benefits over using the Log Analytics agent and a third-party antivirus or SCP. So something for you to kind of look into. And moving on is around security management for Defender for Endpoint. So this is another kind of great feature that's being introduced within probably last 6 months to a year. This is something that I've been really looking forward to. So the use case around security management for Defender for Endpoint is this. There are cases where you may not have a Windows 10 workstation enrolled into Intune for you to get Defender for Endpoint policy, security policy, or agent. And there's also cases where obviously, Windows servers cannot be managed by Defender for Endpoint. And you have to use group policy or a CCM to deploy that security setting to your Windows workstations. The other thing is we're seeing a lot of organizations moving to the cloud, so they don't want to deploy an Active Directory server, a domain controller, and to deploy group policy just for 1 or 2 servers, or set up a SCCM server for deploying configuration for Windows servers. So this kind of bridges that gap where you may have a small organization that may not have the on-premise infrastructure to support server configuration. Additionally speaking, it helps with the gap of where you may have Windows 10 workstations that might not be managed or cannot be managed by Intune or Endpoint Management, but you want to have a Defender for Endpoint agent on it, and you want to have the configuration pushed to it. So this is the problem that this feature solves. And in terms of architecture-wise, this is kind of how it looks like. What happens is the endpoint itself is onboarded into Defender for Endpoint. And once it's onboarded into Defender for Endpoint, trust is also associated with Azure AD. So that endpoint object will be available in Defender, will be available in Azure AD. And once that object is trusted and in Azure AD, you're able to create groups and you're able to create policy within Microsoft Endpoint Manager and push that policy to an endpoint, even though that endpoint is not actually physically managed by Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So it kind of helps bridge that gap of having that device not being physically managed by Endpoint Manager, but still getting policies from Endpoint Manager. Now, in terms of policies that this configuration currently supports, it's somewhat limited, but it still gives you, a great amount of policies. I believe Microsoft is still working on adding new ones, but you can see the chart, a comparison. Microsoft Endpoint Manager security configuration, you have 5 settings that you can configure and push down without onboarding it to Endpoint Manager. Now, if you want the full suite of protections and features, you will have to onboard that device onto Endpoint Manager. In terms of configuration, what that configuration looks like, what you have to do is you have to go into your Defender for Endpoint, configure it to connect to your Microsoft Endpoint Manager through that #1 setting, and then you have to define some of the criterias. And then within your Microsoft Endpoint Manager, you have to configure it for its connection with Defender for Endpoint. And so once that is done, the supported policy that you configure, you will see additional Microsoft Sense right beside the target. So typically, Defender for Endpoint policy will just say MDM. Now the supported policy for Defender for Endpoint will say Microsoft Sense as well. So you can push these to supported endpoints.
I'm sorry to interrupt you,
Sure.
Peter. We have a question from Antoine. The question is, what are the prerequisites for that security setting config to work for server?
For server, all you have to do is the server has to be onboarded into Defender for Endpoint. And on the security.microsoft portal, you will go into settings. You will click on the on button, and then you will say devices. Click on servers, server device. And then the recommendation is to test it with pilot mode. You will have to tag it with endpoint management tag. So there's breakdown of Microsoft documentations around how to do this. So you need to set this up on your Defender for Endpoint security portal. Once that is done, you need to go into your MDE portal and do the connection. It's just a radio button. So once these two connections are done, then you're able to configure policies for it. And the policies are AV policy, exclusion, firewall rules, and your Defender for Endpoint response.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. That answer to your question, Antoine, if you can confirm that.
If we have time at the end, I can definitely pull up my my demo tenant and show you if there's any still questions around this.
Okay, perfect. Okay. That will be amazing. Thank you, Peter.
No problem. Now, the one caveat around this is this only works if you have the Defender for Endpoint license. If you're purchasing your license through Defender for Cloud, this service is not available to you. This is according to Microsoft documentation. I don't know why. I don't know if this is like a physical limitation or whether this is just something that Microsoft put out. But it's something to know that if you're purchasing your Defender for Endpoint license through Defender for Cloud, this feature is not available to you. Now, with that segue, we're going to talk a little bit more about Defender for Cloud and Defender for Server. So what is Defender for Server? So Defender for Server is enhanced. I like to think of it as enhanced security features for Windows and Linux servers. And Defender for Servers is integrated with Defender for Cloud. I believe, I don't know if it's still called Azure Defender, but it used to be called Azure Defender as well, as part of that suite. And it provides essentially protection for hybrid and multi-cloud environments as well. Now, let's talk a little bit more about it. So I've seen a lot of questions that have been asked to me in the past. What is the difference between Defender for Servers and Defender for Endpoint? Which one should I purchase? Which one should I enroll? There's a lot of confusion around licensing. So this is how it kind of looks if I was kind of sum it up. So Defender for Servers, when you purchase Defender for Server license, it includes the license for Defender for Endpoint. You get all the features of Defender for Endpoint. You get that portal. You get everything that comes with Defender for Endpoint. On top of that, you are also getting vulnerability assessment, adaptive application control, file integrity monitor, just in time. So that all these additional features you're getting as part of that comes with Defender for Cloud, and it's available through that Defender for Cloud portal. So these are the added enhancements that you're getting when you enroll your server within Defender for Cloud. So to sum it up, you're getting Defender for Cloud features, everything that's you get for Defender for Endpoint, and then you're getting these additional features that come with Defender for Cloud. So that's what you get. And then if you were to purchase your license only for Defender for Endpoint, you're only getting Defender for Endpoint. You can only enroll your server into Defender for Endpoint. You don't get any of the added features that comes with Defender for Cloud, like vulnerability assessment using Qualys. So these are kind of the two differences if you're considering about license and thinking about where you should enroll your servers into. And in terms of kind of the architecture, what that looks like when you have that server agent. So on the left-hand side, you have your server that is on Azure. What that connection looks like is you'll have a log analytics agent that is sending telemetry into Defender for Cloud, which is used for something like, slipped my mind. Adaptive application control, or features like that. So it's using your log analytics agent telemetry for that, and then it's you also have extensions deployed onto your server. So these extensions are MDE.Windows for your Windows servers, MDE.Linux for your Linux servers. So these are your Defender for Endpoint extensions that are deployed, and it's used to protect your servers. So that's for a server that is on Azure. On the right-hand side, which is a server that's not on Azure, so it could be on-premise, it could be on multi-cloud. The structure, the architecture is a little different. Talking to Defender for Endpoint, it's still the same. It will have the extension, which is MDE.Windows, MDE.Linux. Sorry, I'm just going to check the time. MDE.Windows, MDE.Linux. For those agents to be deployed, what has to happen is Azure ARC has to be utilized to deploy that agent to the server. So what happens is you will enroll that server, whether it's on-premise or on multi-cloud, into Azure ARC. Azure ARC agent will be deployed onto that server. And then through that Azure ARC agent, the MDE extension is then deployed onto the server, and also log analytics agent is deployed onto that server. And then once those agents are deployed, then you see the blue connections going out to Defender for Cloud and Defender for Endpoint. And to kind of illustrate a little bit more around, how Defender for Cloud, Azure ARC kind of comes into play for that hybrid and multi-cloud environment. So regardless whether your endpoint is on premise or on GCP or on AWS, what you have to do is you have to deploy Azure ARC Agent, and all your extensions for your MDE comes through the Azure ARC agent onto your servers that's on hybrid or multi-cloud, and that will then communicate up to your Defender for Cloud or to your Azure plane. And here is a bit of an architecture that's pulled from Microsoft to understand a little bit more about the Azure ARC Agent. So the Azure ARC Agent comes with, essentially 3 components. It comes with the Extension Manager Agent, which is the one that we are, mostly talking about, that deploys the 2 extensions, MDE.Windows or MDE.Linux, to your server, depending on what operating system it is. And then once that agent is deployed, then it's protected by Defender for Endpoint. So that is Azure ARC Agent at a high level, how that architecture works. And recently announced by Microsoft is the support for unified solution within Defender for Cloud. So prior to, I believe, last week before it went GA, going through, if you had a license for Defender for Cloud, you still had to deploy the log analytics agent for Windows Server 2012, Windows Server 2012 R2, and Windows Server 2016. You did not get the full feature of the unified solution agent. So recently, Microsoft has released this new setting, which once you enable it, it will deploy the new unified solution agent for Windows Server 2012 and Windows Server 2016. When you enroll them through Defender for Cloud, as opposed to the old solution. So that is something that's great to look into your environment if you have that enabled, and make sure you test it. And next one we're going to jump into is, we've talked about we talked about most of the architecture components around Defender for Cloud and Defender for Endpoint. I want to spend a little bit more time talking about the architecture, how it looks like integrating with other Microsoft products to achieve, greater results and better visibility for your environment. In terms of integration for Defender for Endpoint, obviously, we've talked about it integrating with Defender for Cloud, where you get Defender for Server features and protection that enhancement. We'll talk a little bit about Azure Sentinel, which is their SIEM solution. We've talked greatly about Microsoft Endpoint Manager or Intune to manage the endpoint deployment and also the management of the features. The other ones that it can integrate with is Defender for Cloud Apps or the MCAS solution. I have a slide on that, which is next. It also integrates with Defender for Identity, which is the protection for on-premise Active Directory. And then also integrates with Defender for Office 365. I missed the 365 there, which is protection for your SharePoint, OneDrive, and Exchange Online. So this slide really kind of talks about, some of the integration features that exist if you have Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Cloud App. So high level, Defender for Cloud App essentially help you to detect shadow IT. So SaaS applications that your corporation doesn't support, but your end user is utilizing. So what Defender for Endpoint does or can do is when a user using their workstation, those telemetry is collected, those logs, and then sent to Defender for Cloud App, and Defender for Cloud App then is able to analyze what the user is doing, what SaaS application the user is accessing. So it's able to kind of get that telemetry from your Defender for Endpoint agent. Additionally speaking, the integration allows you to block unsanctioned apps. So from Defender for Cloud Apps, if there's a specific SaaS application that you want to block, you can block it from your Defender for Cloud App, and that setting is then enforced through Defender for Endpoint. So that's where you see that line going back. The unsanctioned app is enforced to that Defender for Endpoint agent. So that's how the two products work together. One passes telemetry over, and the second is if there's any unsanctioned apps that you want to block, it's enforced by Defender for Endpoint. Now, let's talk a little bit about XDR, or Extended Detection and Response. So this is a pretty hot word. At a high level, basically what it means is we are aggregating the detections from different security products and putting it together so that you have that single view, single detection and control across multiple different security solutions that you use within your organization. So to give you an example, if we were to look at Microsoft products from right to left, so we are getting telemetry in from MCAS, which is the Microsoft Cloud App Security. We're getting telemetry in from Defender for Office 365. That's your Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams protection. Defender for Endpoint, which we've been talking about. You're getting telemetry in for Azure Identity Protection. So these are signing logs that are going into your Azure AD logs. And then Defender for Identity, which is your Active Directory. That's your on-premise Active Directory protection. And then for the Azure Defender, so you're getting all your Azure services that are reporting into Defender for Cloud. So that gives you that full view across your organization for the different critical products, whether it's Azure resources, Azure components, that's really coming into, that's being protected and you have visibility through Defender for Cloud, or whether that is your Microsoft 360 products that is being protected by Microsoft 365 Defender. So that kind of makes up your XDR, that full visibility across the Microsoft products. In terms of how that looks like, what that looks like is you are using mainly these two portals to have your visibility. On the left-hand side, which is your Microsoft 365 Defender portal, which is security.microsoft.com. You get that pane, and over the last 2 years or so, Microsoft has aggregated all the Microsoft 365 Defender products into that one portal. So you have that centralized view, incident response, hunting, all within that one portal. And on the right-hand side, where you see that Defender for Cloud, so that's able to kind of monitor all your Azure resources. And also, I should probably say multi-cloud, so you can also connect your AWS and GCP tenants into it. So that kind of provides you that complete cloud view of your resources. So that covers XDR and how Defender for Endpoint plays into that whole space. The next one I want to talk about is around XDR and SIEM. What XDR kind of is missing is third-party appliances or third-party endpoints like firewalls that you have, or any type of other. You might have a CASB solution that's non-Microsoft. So all the other security products that you may have on your in your organization does not report into Microsoft XDR solution. You can have those telemetry report into Azure Sentinel. I think the new name is Microsoft Sentinel. So you can have all that telemetry report into Sentinel. On top of that, you can have your existing Microsoft solution report into Sentinel. And Sentinel will provide that single pane of glass view of all your telemetry alerts, and you're able to hunt across your environment, regardless whether it's Microsoft solution or a third-party solution. So you have that full, or you want to have that full visibility across all your infrastructures, all your security products across your organization. So there is no gaps within security and security monitoring for your organization. So that's kind of how it all ties in. And what you will be doing is, obviously, you'll be coming into the Microsoft Sentinel portal, where you can see all your incident detection rules, and you will be to build your detection rules for all the telemetry that gets, all the logs or telemetry that gets pulled into Sentinel. So you're able to hunt adversary across the different products. So that's how it connects in. And to kind of summarize this talk, these are kind of the main points I want to bring to your attention, right? So if you are deploying Defender for Endpoint to what I will call a legacy operating system, Windows 7, Windows 8, there is no antivirus. To get that full feature parity, you'll either need a third-party antivirus with the MDE, or you need to install SCP with MDE to get the full feature parity. In terms of deploying a scale, you will need endpoint management solution. We talked about the different endpoint management solution: Ansible for Linux, Microsoft Endpoint Manager for Windows or for mobile device. There is no way of deploying MDE agents without, or configuring MDE agents without endpoint management solution. And for unified solution agent, right now, if you're deploying new MDE to Windows Server 2012 or 2016, it's only going to be unified solution agent. However, if you have deployed MDE to these servers in the past, you should test and look into deploy or upgrading to Unified Solution Agent, because it will provide you a lot more features. And on top of that, if you are using a third-party antivirus for Windows Server 2012, you can, potentially reduce your license fees on that and use the new Unified Solution Agent. Security management for Windows Endpoint. If you have endpoints that cannot be managed through MDM, you can still configure security settings through security management. Onto Defender for Cloud. So Defender for Cloud, just to reiterate, it's enhanced security for Windows servers and Linux servers. So what that will provide you is additional protections, such as vulnerability scanning through Qualys, and you are able to be protected. It's able to provide you protection for multi-cloud and hybrid through Azure ARC Agent that needs to be deployed. And lastly, if you are looking and able to, if you have an E5 license, or if you have all the Microsoft or some of the Microsoft security products, you can integrate these into XDR or SIEM plus SOAR solution. Okay, so that summarizes the talk. That's it. Is there any questions in the chat? Let me go back.
Thank you so much for this talk, Peter. And for the people online, if you have any question, do not hesitate to ask a question. If you are not comfortable in English, you can ask your question in French, and I can translate that. Oh, we have a first question from Antoine. I don't know if you see the question, or I can read the question for you, Peter.
I see it. How do you say it's optimized?
Maybe we can
management.
Yeah, maybe we can repeat the question for the recording. And
Sure.
The question of Antoine is, how do you suggest to optimize MDE management in multi-domain, multi-tenant environment?
Yeah, so that is a good question. Management is going to be hard. So maybe I'll just go back it up a bit. So if you have multiple tenants, multiple Azure tenants, you have to deploy multiple instances of Defender for Endpoint, and you have to manage them through multiple portals. So to my knowledge, there is no what's the term I'm looking for? There is no unified portal for Defender for Endpoint across different tenants. In terms of if you have multiple domains and all those domains are under the same Azure tenant, then you can just deploy your agents as if it's the same. So on your Defender for Endpoint portal, or just show up under different domains. So that's the only thing.
Okay, thank you so much for this answer, Peter. We have
Francisco.
also Francisco, who said hi from Florida. I think it's an ex-coworker from BlackBerry. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I was. Sorry. Lighthouse is what I'm thinking of. So there is no Lighthouse available for Defender for Endpoint, like there is Lighthouse for Sentinel. I don't work on the I don't work on small business and medium-sized business. I think there is Azure Lighthouse for 365, but it's different from enterprise. Yeah, so to answer your question, there is no Azure Lighthouse availability for Defender for Endpoint. You can, if you're working in small and medium-sized organization, there's a separate product, a separate service for that. I don't know if I answers your question. Okay, yeah. So the question is, so Microsoft. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so we have a delay of 2 minutes. Yeah, between our conversation and the live stream on YouTube.
So the question is, he's basically saying that there is a difference between Microsoft 365 Lighthouse and Azure Lighthouse. Yeah, there is a difference. I do know that. But I haven't looked too much into Microsoft 365 Lighthouse, but I believe Microsoft 365 Lighthouse is not supported for the enterprise endpoint, Defender for Endpoint. It's supported for the Microsoft 365 Defender for the medium and small business. Any other questions? Okay.
I think we don't have any other question. Thank you so much, Peter, for this presentation.
No problem.
That was very interesting. And the presentation will be posted on YouTube on the Azure Quebec community YouTube channel. And if you want to rewatch the presentation, you can do it. And if you have any question, you can post your question in the comment in the commenter of the presentation, and I will forward the question to Peter. Thank you so much again, Peter, for that. Have a great evening.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.